Hey everybody, welcome inside the Indiana Convention Center here at the NFL Combine, where myself and CBS Sports Draft analyst Chris Trapasso are basically alone. There's hardly any other. I saw Aaron Nagler here. Does he count? Other than that, just a handful of people have arrived here and started podcasting on Monday, but I couldn't wait. We'll have, of course, the conversations with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell going on at the podiums and side sessions with reporters here tomorrow, which we will have a full breakdown of that. But we could not hold off wanting to talk about what we are looking for this week, and we decided to make some lists of the most interesting names. Now, this could mean anything, Chris. Interesting names could mean people who are going to speak. It could also mean prospects. It could also mean rumors. And I think I want to start out with the most interesting name on my mind, which is, it's going to shock everybody, Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold will be a fascinating name, especially, and you and I both do this here in Indy. After we're done with our work, we head out, we try to talk to as many people as we can to figure out what's the real buzz here. Last year, we were beating the bushes for J.J. McCarthy takes. I was walking up to everybody I could say, what do you think of J.J. McCarthy? Tell me. And gathered a bunch of information that way. But now I'm going to be asking everybody, where do you think Sam Darnold is playing? So I have Sam Darnold as the most interesting name here in Indianapolis to hear about from the Vikings brass, but also what everybody is saying about where he's going to play next season.
Yeah, that's a really good name, and it makes a lot of sense on this podcast. But just to quickly go back to that experience last year of J.J. McCarthy, everyone, including me and you, came into the Combine in 2024. Oh, J.J. McCarthy might be like mid to late first-round pick. And we heard like the first night we reconvened, I think, for our second podcast after this intro one that we're doing now. And so many people out at the bars and restaurants were like, J.J. McCarthy's going to be like one of the first quarterbacks off the board. He's going to not get outside the top 15. You guys like the NFL. So we were hearing from NFL people that the league, which I know you don't like to say the league because all it takes is one team, but it was a consensus seemingly, depending on who we were talking to. It was like, nope, J.J. McCarthy is going to be an earlier pick than we all expected going in. So maybe we get some kind of clarity on that with Sam Darnold.
At the same time, I don't think anybody told us that Michael Penix was going to be a top 10
that
pick.
Was secret. That was not something that was said here.
And just as a side note, we'll get back to Darnold. Shadur Sanders not throwing here, I think is a mistake for him. And I know a lot of people have said, well, he's throwing 1,000 passes or whatever, but I do go back to McCarthy and Michael Penix, who both in their throwing sessions really impressed, especially Penix after his throwing session. I think a lot of people were saying, okay, wow, he really set that thing on fire. But also J.J. McCarthy, he had impressed some people as well with his throwing because it looked better than it looked at the end of the season in Michigan. So even in this short amount of time, he had made progress. And where McCarthy really crushed it was in all the interviews. And I don't just mean the ones with teams, but also in his media stuff, which is something to keep an eye on too, because these guys will kind of go through the ringer and they'll talk to a bunch of different shows and you can get a little bit of a vibe of where the guy stands. And McCarthy blew everybody out of the water with how mature he came across, how well he answered the question about not throwing a lot of passes and playing for a running team and things like that. And I think that a lot of those things that we learned in Indianapolis really carried over with J.J. McCarthy to what we saw in OTAs and minicamp and training camp, the way he handled himself around the building, the way that he's able to communicate with his coaches and his teammates, the character that we heard so much about, and the raw skill that was improving. And that's going to be something we're always looking for here is these players. There's a lot of them who are younger in this draft, like McCarthy was, who's going to improve, who's going to kind of show that they are getting better coming out of college rather than maybe have peaked. But let's get back to Sam Darnold. What is your take right now on where he ends up playing?
I mean, maybe this is a minority opinion. I don't feel like it is. I think he's going to be back in Minnesota. I really do. Now, maybe when we podcast tomorrow or in 2 days, it's like, oh man, everyone out at the bar is like, no, he's going to Oakland or he's going to the Raiders. He's going wherever. I just feel like what the coaching staff was able to do and how he feels about, hey, here is a pretty nice, cushy situation. To have both sides kind of be on the same page. And yes, I know that J.J. McCarthy is waiting in the wings. But I think even Sam Darnold understands that he's not going to necessarily need to sign a 5 or a 6 year deal. He can get security for maybe 2 years and then go in at still not that old of an age, around 30 years old, where he could hit free agency again after more successful seasons under Kevin O'Connell, under McCown, with Justin Jefferson, and this great situation that we've talked about now for like multiple years in Minnesota.
Yeah, I think if you're trying to put an odds on where he ends up and you made it into a pie chart, maybe the Vikings would deserve the highest percentage.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I also think that those percentages wouldn't be high for anybody because the possibilities are real with a couple of different teams. I mean, even the New York Giants are being talked about as someone who wants to really get in there and talk to Cam Ward, Shadur Sanders, not certain that they're going to draft a quarterback to try to save their careers. And the same thing with Tennessee after such a bad first season for Brian Callahan. You don't get too many of those seasons, right? And they've been making changes, front office changes. There's no guarantee that they're staying with him for very long. And they're probably going to take, if they don't take one of those quarterbacks, Abdul Carter or someone like that, to rebuild their roster, but they need someone to win them football games. They can't go 4-13 next year and hope to survive again for that head coach. So they've got to be an interesting name as well. Even the Cleveland Browns can be tossed out there. You mentioned the Raiders, which I think would be the second favorite, if not the favorite, but the Vikings being the incumbent of having Sam Darnold and the franchise tag option. And then there's this other thing that has snuck in to the picture, which is Matthew Stafford and where he might end up playing, which could be New York. The Raiders could be interested. And that's another name that I was going to bring up on my list of most interesting names that we're talking about this week is everyone's going to be asking, where is Matthew Stafford playing? But then the Rams, all of a sudden, if Stafford goes, they become part of that Sam Darnold conversation as well. So I think if we were doing that pie chart, it would be the Vikings sliver is maybe 30%, and the Rams is 20, and the Raiders is 25, and the Browns is 10, and the Giants, right? So there's all these different options. And I think, Chris, that the main thing the Vikings have to do here is they have to figure out, is their teams willing to trade for Sam Darnold if he's on the franchise tag? And I think that the salary cap going up may have made teams a little bit more willing to do that, even if it's only for 1 year of Sam Darnold. But if you're the Titans looking to save your life, I think you're willing to trade some sort of draft pick for him. But do you think that it is possible that there are teams that would be willing to trade for him on the franchise tag?
I think so. And to use your Titans example, I mean, their new GM, Mike Bergonzi, new guy, fresh face. The previous GM, Rand Carthon, only got 2 years. So, like, this new GM in Tennessee could say, look, I don't want to start with a 4-13 season. Brian Callahan doesn't want that either. And being that he worked with Joe Burrow, with Zach Taylor, it's a Sean McVay scheme. I think the connection there, the Sam Darnold with having played with Kyle Shanahan, all of those, that Shanahan web that has grown so big over the last 4 or 5 years, that could play a pretty big role as well. And we normally don't see those trades on the franchise tag, but this is a unique case where I think it could certainly make sense for the Vikings, and we may get more suitors for Sam Darnold than really we normally get for any franchise tag player.
So where do you want to go with the next most interesting name here in Indy?
I'm going to go with Omarion Hampton, a running back from North Carolina. He showed up in the first round of Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft earlier this week or last week. He had like 3 running backs in the first round when all we had heard up until this time is it's going to be Ashton-Jeanty. That's it. He also had Travion Henderson from Ohio State in the first round.
To the Vikings.
So, but for me, which DJ has certainly more sources and more of a connection to the league than I do, on film, I think Omarion Hampton is a better fit overall for what the Vikings want, that he is big, powerful, but still explosive. The stretch run game, the inside zone run game, that's where he really excelled at North Carolina. And there's also some buzz that Omarion Hampton is going to really test through the roof at like 220, 225 pounds. Could he then be that RB2? Could he cement himself? I really could have said all the running backs because it's a deep class, but he's the name that we've only talked about one running back for the first couple months of the pre-draft process, if you want to date it back to like bowl season. But who is going to emerge as the RB2? I think at this point, Jeremiah gives you a little indicator that maybe that's how the quote-unquote league feels. I want to see how he tests. And even from a Vikings perspective, he is a one-cut and go runner that feels like a perfect fit in his own blocking scheme.
Folks, I'm trying a new thing in order to stop going to fast food restaurants all the time with my busy schedule. It is called Tempo Meals. Tempo is a weekly delivery service that delivers chef-crafted meals from a dietitian-approved menu fresh to your door. Their perfectly portioned lunches and dinners take all the guesswork out of eating as well. They are fully prepared and can be heated up in the microwave in just 3 minutes. A couple of meals that I've got coming my way this week are the sweet and sour meatballs, the honey glazed pork chop, and the tender chipotle sirloin. Those are just my choices, though. There are dozens and dozens of options, and I figured it all out in about 5 clicks. So, for a limited time, Tempo is offering my listeners 60% off your first box. Go to tempomeals.com/purple insider. That is tempomeals.com/purple insider for 60% off your first box. Tempomeals.com/purple insider. Rules and restrictions apply. So I pulled up your list. You tweeted out a bunch of lists. You wrote it at cbssports.com of your top 10s at each position. And I did notice that Omarion Hampton was not as high on your list as a lot of other running backs. In fact, you had him behind some other guys that I haven't really looked at a lot yet because all we've heard about is Genty and Hampton as the first rounders, and then the 2 guys from Ohio State, but mostly Henderson. And anytime Daniel Jeremiah does a mock, we're all going to go, oh, okay, yeah, exactly. Who's he got?
That's what I did.
Yeah, exactly. And so to have Henderson going to the Vikings, and you didn't have him as high on your list either for those 2 guys. So why is that? Like, why is Henderson and Hampton not quite as high as we see in some other mocks?
So I hadn't watched Henderson yet. I literally watched him this morning. It was like an omission. I was like, oh, he's like considered one of the top 10-ish or so running backs. Watched him, still wasn't quite as high on him. I think I said it last week, or I guess 2 weeks ago in our debut of this draft season. I'm a big elusiveness guy with running backs. The missed tackle forced, I think, is the best indicator of what a running back can do when blocking isn't great. Now, do all teams feel that way? Like James Cook for the Bills is not crazy elusive. He has got great vision, surprising speed. When it's blocked up, he can hit a 50 or 60-yard gain. You mentioned the Vikings have not been an explosive run game team the last 2 years. If Omarion Hampton, that's why I picked him. If Omarion Hampton, if Travion Henderson run low 4.4s and have a 38-inch vertical and their 10-yard split is through the roof, I'll tweak my grade a little bit because I factor in the combine reasonably heavily, but I think that would cement them as higher running back prospects than I think, and that what a lot of us went into this draft is like, oh, Genty's the only RB that can go in the first round. Maybe there'll be multiple, or maybe there's just more that are going to be available and need to be picked on the second round of this draft.
The question for me is, would the Vikings actually consider a running back? Because clearly, looking at the names on your list, there's a lot of talent here.
It's a really good class.
Pretty absurd, actually, how good of a running back you could get at the top of this draft. But also the top could mean trading back into the second. It could mean the third round. And I think that this week is the opportunity for guys to show that they're freaks. And when we look at Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry, that's what everybody's going to be looking at. Those 2 guys in the maximized circumstances with good offensive lines, great schemes, running quarterbacks. They can average 5.5 to 6 yards a carry. I don't know that you do that with someone who has average skills or average combine skills.
Traits, yeah.
Traits. That's the word I'm looking for. And this is where someone like Cam Scatterbo becomes very interesting because when you watch him play, you're like, is he lightning fast?
He's not fast. No, he's not.
And can you be that guy who creates explosive plays if you are not a 4-4 or less type of player? Can you do it by breaking tackles and being kind of crafty? I am not as convinced on players like that. That's why I like RJ Harvey for the Vikings so much from UCF. I mean, he is an elusive freak.
Bucky Irving type.
Yeah, I mean, he just is just between tackles, and he's small, but he is kind of hiding in spaces and using his patience and things like that. Like, he's very crafty, but he's not like running through people. I'm not sure that there's a lot of running backs other than Henry in the whole league who are running through people.
No, that's true. And I think what will be the ultimate question that will need to be answered, and we'll get the answer on draft weekend. Are the Vikings okay drafting an RJ Harvey in the middle of the draft and being like, this is not your traditional bell cow? but he's going to hit us long runs. He's super elusive. And like we saw with the Buccaneers, they went into last season. All right, it's Rashad White, and then maybe we'll give some carries to this Bucky Irving guy. Then Irving is ultimately the only rookie running back to go over 1,000 yards. Are we going to maybe see a shift that with the league, maybe it's just a few teams, maybe it's just the Bucs, maybe it's the Vikings, that they say, hey, we'll pick someone that's like under 200 and just he's our bell cow? Or does Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi ultimately go with, hey, Omarion Hampton is not super elusive, but he's 220. We can give him 250 carries the first couple years when he's cheap on that rookie deal, and he'll hit us some long runs when it's blocked up.
Yeah, I'm curious what they think about the type of scheme that they run, which I haven't quite figured out 3 years in, actually, or what scheme that they would want to build around somebody. Maybe put it that way, because they have been taping this position together. It was an old Delvin Cook who had a good first half of a season and not a good second half. Same kind of thing with Aaron Jones last year, where age got to him. They like to do a lot of outside pitches and stuff like that to him. So I think there was some adjustment, but there's not an identity there where we can say, hey, this is the type of running back we want to pick because this is the scheme that we run. They don't have that, which to me means go pick the most talented guy. Yeah. And I think in this draft, I would prefer third round than first round because the other needs are at positions that maybe aren't as deep or are a little harder to find. So I want to go, speaking of deep positions, I want to go with Deion Walker for a name to watch here because, first of all, I want to know what he weighs in at. I mean, this is a massive human being, but I mean, is it too easy to say Tavondre Sweat from last year, like this just big, or Jordan Davis? Is he that freakish of an athlete? He is an enormous human being who can also get after the passer, though. And that's where it's got my interest, because I think we heard this about like, oh, is Vita Vea really going to be worth it? Is Tavondre Sweat really going to be worth it? He was a second round pick, but guys like that, Derek Brown a few years ago. And the answer has been mostly yes, if they have some element of pass rush to them. Even a Dexter Lawrence was supposed to be I'm just going to stuff the middle guy, and he developed more of a pass rush to the point where he became great. I see that sort of potential in Walker. Maybe that's too high, but I want to know what this big man runs, because when I've watched him play, he looks like he has flexibility and some quickness that you just do not expect from a gentleman this big.
You nailed it with the nose tackle type that I tend to like, and what recent history has shown can actually be a 3-down player. Dexter Lawrence actually was a good pass rusher at Clemson. He could just move centers and guards like off of him with clubs and swipes. He could get up the field at a reasonable clip, given how big he was. Deion Walker has flashes of that. My comp for him is, and I'm not trying to do too many ranges, but my comp for him is either a better Alan Branch or a more raw Dexter Lawrence. The pass rush move arsenal isn't quite to where Dexter Lawrence was coming out of Clemson, but he's going to be like 6'6", 340. And 2 years ago, I don't know if there was too many defensive tackles in college football who had more pressures than Deion Walker. Like, he is a nimble dude. The bull rushing ability is absolutely there. He's not a linear player. He can kind of squeeze between gaps. Wasn't quite as good or productive this year, but he had so much more attention on him after that big season. He would be another, most interesting guy at the combine, because even though it's a deep class, almost everyone else is between 6 foot and 6'2" and 310 and 280 and 320. He is a different breed, and he can certainly be a good run defender, but I love his pass rushing upside and just what he showed he was capable of in the SEC as a pass rusher.
Well, and this is what the Vikings had in Linval Joseph for a few years there, especially 2017, where he was getting 40 pressures a year, which is really good.
That's
for
valuable at nose tackle. So valuable.
If you could do that, and he was playing on third down. I mean, if you could play on third down and get after the passer at that kind of size, and we see it, we talk about it all the time on the show about guards are just not physically able to handle guys that big, and the Vikings are on the wrong side of it so often over the last few years. But at nose tackle, defensive tackle, they're running a guy who starts the season at 300, probably ends the season at 280, and Harrison Phillips, and he's a good player, and he's good technically, and I think he is a physical presence in the run game, but not a overpowering. More he does it through technique, not I'm going to actually move your body. So
and
that's
not
why
an up the field guy either.
Right. He's not a create pressure,
not
right, exactly. But there are guys like that in this
Yes.
draft. And so even though Walker is my favorite for name to throw out there, Omar Norman Lott is a really interesting one in terms of testing. He's somebody that's been mocked sometimes in the back of the first, by some folks, sometimes in the third. Maybe there's some limitations there. TJ Sanders, Derek Harmon, these are two guys, Sanders out of South Carolina and Harmon out of Oregon. Harmon is one where I saw a lot of him. Oregon was on TV all the time.
Yep.
Stood out all the time. And he is that guy we're talking about that just his job is to go get the quarterback, or at least that's the way it seems to me. This group here, you could name 5-6 guys who I think would be good picks for the Vikings. How they're going to stand out, though, is here in Indianapolis, because this is a position I think correlates as much as any to size, speed, quickness, strength. Go play football. I think defensive tackle is one of those positions.
Yeah, no, that's a funny segue, because it's like, oh, the casual fan thinks, oh, these guys are not going to ever run 40 yards. Like defensive tackles, it doesn't matter. No, it does. If you look at the history of the full workout, you can love a guy on film, and if he has, a terrible workout, the chances of him becoming a really good player drastically decrease. And the opposite is true for someone that you're like, oh yeah, he's pretty good on film, and then he just blows it through, just has an insane workout, like blows the roof off of Lucas Oil Stadium. That increases a lot. I always think back to Milton Williams a few years ago, who's going to be a very rich man in a few weeks, from the Philadelphia Eagles, who's a free agent. Louisiana Tech film I thought was pretty good, but he had an RAS of 9.97 or something.
Relative athletic score, that is.
Yeah, sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself not explaining that.
Based on the combine.
His full workout was tremendous. So we will get a range for these players of, okay, we like CJ West from Indiana, but he didn't really test that well. He's probably, and then you can understand where the Vikings could ultimately get these players. By the way, CJ West from Indiana, my comp for him is Aleem McNeil. He is a nasty, up the field nose tackle. I don't know how great of an athlete he is, but talk about pass rushing moves. He has them. And when you can come into the NFL with an understanding of how to utilize your hands and win with your hands, that gives you a leg up. So CJ West is someone that I think would make a lot of sense for the Vikings too.
And we have seen the Vikings focus a lot on production with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, although they've only drafted 23 players since he took over.
Oh wow.
So we don't really have, and they're not going to draft a lot more. So I'll be saying that to you next year, more likely than not. But we don't really have that. We knew with Spielman, all right, they're going to draft this defensive lineman who's
corner, Trey Waynes and Mike Hughes. There was a kind of a blueprint.
Yes, right? They're going to try to recreate Danielle Hunter. They're going to try to find a Stephon Diggs. We know that they're going to do that, and they're going to trade back 1,000,000 times and draft 20 times on day 3. And we knew all the things that were going to happen. We still don't really. I think they're not afraid to draft older players. We did notice that with someone like Mekhi Blackman, who was taken a couple years ago and flashed and looked like he's going to be somebody. So they're not afraid of that. But we can't say, oh, well, they only take freaks or they only take productive guys. But I think at this position, they're probably aware that has to be the case. Who is the next person on your list?
I'm going to steal yours, if you don't mind. I think Pete Carroll and that whole Pete Carroll and everything new with the Raiders, that there's Tom Brady, where is Tom Brady kind of the GM? Is he kind of the owner? I know he's part owner now, but is he really calling the shots? Chip Kelly there. It's really interesting. All of this, the Raiders, coaching staff, front office, everything's new there. They have a clear need at quarterback. The quarterback class is not very good. Are they in the Sam Darnold sweepstakes? Are they in the Matt Stafford sweepstakes? What do we hear from them? Do they give anything in press conferences, or do we hear anything throughout the week from anyone within the Raiders organization? Big year for them. They have an early pick. They need a quarterback, and they have a lot of money and a lot of draft picks in this class.
The Raiders are the most interesting team for me outside of course, the Vikings, because that's why I'm here. But the Raiders would be second place, because if they go after Stafford, or we even hear that they're interested in going after Stafford, does that reduce the odds that they would go after Sam Darnold? Or by how much? Clearly, if they got Stafford, it would. But in terms of the Vikings making out their list, well, who's going to be interested if we try to tag and trade? The number one team you're writing down is the Raiders. But suddenly Stafford might be available. But everyone's got Stafford going to New York. which does make a lot of sense for them. And if you're him, you're seeing Malik Neighbors and going, that's fine, that will work. And they can sign Cooper Kupp and everybody can be happy there, and they'd probably be a fairly competitive team. But if Stafford goes to the Giants, that leaves the Raiders open. And the Raiders, to me, have a win now type of mentality. Go into this offseason, make as many signings as they possibly can. The coach is 100 years old. And even with Tom Brady, there's no world where Tom Brady joins a team and is like, you know what we should do is like we should long-term rebuild, slow, methodical wins.
Not pick a quarterback for 5 years. Like, no way.
Right, that's not Tom Brady. And one thing I keep coming back to is the best game that Sam Darnold played all year was arguably against the Green Bay Packers at home. And guess who was broadcasting that game? Does that qualify as tampering? Could the Vikings actually be on the right side of tampering this time instead of like with Kirk last year? But honestly, I think him calling that game and seeing how well Sam Darnold played, he was good under pressure. He was good after making a mistake and bouncing back. And he has that great interview with him after the game that everybody remembers. I mean, I don't think it's very hard to make that connection, but also trying to sort through, like, who does run this team? What are they going for? Because they've been so lost in the woods for so long. And normally they wouldn't get 2 seconds on my show. Like, whatever, the Raiders barely exist. But suddenly they become a team that not only could be involved in Sam Darnold, but also all those free agents that you love so much. You go to overthecap.com, you look at free agent tracker, and you go, ooh, I want that one and that one and that one and that one. Well, the Raiders have the most money, and they have Brady, and they're in Vegas, and they can give the most money. So that is if their owner's willing to do it, of course. But that situation in general and trying to figure out what their ethos is, what their thought process is, who runs them is a great one. And it doesn't count as stealing it from me if I said it to you before the show.
Well, but still, it kind of was. I'll do one other quick one because it's in the division. To me, Ryan Poles, the Bears GM, they have 9 picks. And here's why he's fascinating. Not that we're going to necessarily get anything here from him that's anything super juicy. They have 9 picks, but when you look at them, you're like, okay, they have like a bunch of young offensive linemen. They have Caleb Williams. It's a huge offseason, year 2. They have Ben Johnson now. They like, what's the future for Keenan Allen? What's the future? They just drafted Rome Odunze. They have DJ Moore. Like, are they going to use a lot of those 9 picks on offense or not? Like, they're not really set up like, oh, year 2, like the Patriots, we're seeing this Patriots-Texans game up here on this TV in here. It's like the Patriots are going to add receivers and tight ends and offensive linemen. Like our draft is going to be based on year 2 development for our young quarterback. The Bears really aren't in that situation. And for as much as I do think Caleb played okay at times, they have to be better offensively, and they can't just be stagnant personnel-wise on that side of the ball. So with 9 picks, a fair amount of money, I'm interested if we get any nuggets about the Bears' intentions to try to return to some relevance with Caleb Williams in year 2.
Well, their whole offensive line is free agents too. And I mean, Tevin Jenkins, Coleman, Shelton, is that his name? At least 3 of them are free agents. So
what do they do there? Yeah.
What are they going to do there? And if Ben Johnson, I assume Ben Johnson is talking, the more that he talks, the more I want to hear how he's going to make it work with Caleb Williams, which is going to be a main question for that team, because offensive line is a place to start when your quarterback gets sacked 68 times, but it was also his fault probably. Right. At least half of those times. So the Bears and the Packers, the Lions have cap space. They've got huge changes. They're going to be, talking about those changes as well. Offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and where those are going. My next on the list is Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward. Now, at least one of them is not throwing. Maybe both of them are not throwing. But the buzz around here, I want to know if there's buzz of those guys are going at the very top, or if people are saying, let's hold our horses here.
Like we got last year with J.J. McCarthy, yeah.
And even a couple years ago when it was the Malik Willis thing, I mean, there was thought that Malik Willis could go high. We talked about that quite a bit, and I thought he had a good workout here. But most of the conversation was like, these quarterbacks just aren't worth it. It's like a bad situation with the quarterback class. And I wonder, are we trying to make Shedeur and Cam Ward happen as like the guys? Or, I mean, even with a Will Levis, like, or is it more of, yeah, they're okay, but nobody's really going to bet their futures on those guys. And this does matter to the Vikings, because if there's another team looking to trade for, and let me just go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here. If there's another team looking to trade for Darnold, if they draft a quarterback, they're probably looking to play either one of those guys right away, especially Cam Ward, who's on the older side. I think they want him to get in right away, and teams aren't that patient. You're not trading for Darnold and getting Shedeur Sanders, right? So any team that gets those guys at the top is off the list. But I was thinking about the Alex Smith trade from Washington's perspective. When they acquired him, they signed him to an extension right away. They acquired him, and I think that's what a team would want to do at the top if they feel like these quarterbacks aren't worth it. If you're a Brian Daboll or you're a Pete Carroll or you're a Brian Callahan and their new leadership in Tennessee, you probably want to get him in and get an extension done with him so you know who your quarterback is for a couple years if you're not sold on drafting these guys. So is the hype real or is it not real about Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders?
Two things of what you just said. Yeah, I want to see if there is that similar to last year and similar to 2022, almost like a consensus with all the people that you talked to at JW Marriott tonight and throughout the week. Or will there not be a consensus? So then maybe we leave and say, oh, okay, yeah, like we have to just do our own evaluations. We don't know where these guys are going to go. And to what you just said, I think is important to keep in mind with this quarterback situation when it ties with Stafford and Darnold and the draft. Those three teams that you just listed, I think they are all in we need to win right now mode. Brian Callahan, the Giants, and the Raiders with Pete Carroll, who's 73 years old, and Tom Brady as the owner. So this is not that classic. There's not that many classic situations. Clear rebuild. They need a quarterback. They don't really care if they don't win in year one. You don't really have that at the top of the draft. And it seems like almost every other year there are like at least two or three of those type of situations, and we just do not have that. So maybe there will be more of a push to acquire a Sam Darnold, and maybe teams will say, look, we're going to pay a little extra. We'll give an extra draft pick, or we'll go one round higher than we normally would. Or for Stafford, that's what's really interesting, that those teams somehow have, their GMs and coaches have kept their jobs, or are in Pete Carroll's situation, an older coach. I think they're going to want to win right now with a veteran.
I think the Vikings are holding a lot of cards because of that, because there aren't clear guys at the top. I mean, if there were 6 first-rounders like there were last year, then there would be a lot of teams saying thanks, but no thanks. We're going to draft our Bo Nix. We're going to draft our Drake May. But instead, I think that maybe you could make an argument that Cam Ward would be in the conversation kind of where Bo Nix was last year. But I you look, what did Bo Nix throw? Like 45 touchdowns and 3 picks at Oregon or something. And he was being like, he's not that great of a prospect. Like, what? Yes, he was. And when I've watched a lot of Sanders because I've enjoyed watching Colorado football. It was always entertaining. They had no defense. And
they were kind of like appointment viewing because of him, because of Deanna, because of Travis Hunter.
Right, exactly. And Shedeur was a fun watch too, because he would get sacked a bunch of times, but also make a bunch of great throws. For a minute there, I thought when he was, I guess it would have been a junior, the first Deion year in Colorado, I thought maybe I could see this, like, I don't know, Drew Brees type of accuracy freak show where he just has pinpoint passing ability and guts and smarts and all that stuff. And last year he played better and their team was better. Yep. But I also thought that some of the weaknesses were revealed with him, where the accuracy is not as consistent as maybe it looked at the beginning, right? As far as the high end. And the thing with Shedeur Sanders, I was trying to think about, I got a comp already for Shedeur Sanders. And this is breaking one of our rules. We usually do this show before the draft of like 90s, early 2000s comps. So let me throw mine out for Shedeur Sanders.
I have not heard this yet.
Right now, because I was just talking to somebody in the league about it yesterday. Ooh. In the league. If you say in the league, that's how you have to say it. So if you're talking to people tomorrow night, we do another pod, you got to go in the league. Okay. Chad Pennington. I got Chad Pennington because it's a not that athletic accuracy. I think he's tough. I think he's extremely tough.
Took a lot of hits and got back up.
And I think you can win games with him. I don't know if you can win games against Josh Allen with him. That's how I view Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah, I think I've landed. I have not thought about the 90s comps yet, although I will spend an inordinate amount of time when we get ready for that episode.
I'll come up with more. We'll talk about this one now, but I'll come up with more.
I think I said it 2 weeks ago. I'm in the Teddy Bridgewater, and then high end is Geno Smith. I think Geno Smith is actually a little bit more of a talented thrower, has a little bit of a stronger arm. But to mention to kind of piggyback off just Shedeur being here, and yes, he's definitely one of the most interesting people here in Indianapolis. I'm never one with my own evaluations to be like, oh, I'm going to really just dive into the combine throwing session and like change a grade based on how someone did it. But I think back to 2022 where CJ Stroud, or 2023, where CJ Stroud knew he was going to throw up against Anthony Richardson, who threw like a 90-yard ball at the end of his session. And Stroud could have said, hey, I know my arm's not quite as strong. I'm probably going to be one of the first picks. He threw and put on a show with his accuracy. When I first saw that Shedeur Sanders was not going to throw, I'm like, oh, it's because he knows his arm is not really that good. But then I'm like, wait, there's not an Anthony Richardson type in this class. There's not someone that's just going to, even Cam Ward's arm is not that much better. And this could have been an opportunity for Sanders to just be pinpoint accurate against air with no pressure. He's not getting sacked. And he didn't ultimately take that. So that, to me, I thought I'm not going to crush him for it. It doesn't factor into my evaluation, but was a missed opportunity that CJ Stroud took advantage of and seized and said, I'm going to show how I can separate myself from these other quarterbacks by being super duper accurate. Because if there is an area where Sanders can say I'm a little better, it is the accuracy. Maybe though, again, like you're saying, because I agree, his accuracy is not Stroud or Joe Burrow level.
And I think that what the comp that he wants to make is those guys.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just that same sort of not freak runner, but also like a field general. I don't know if anyone could say they're on the level of field general of Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow is like Drew Brees, and I just don't see quite that from Shedeur Sanders. And if there are teams that are saying we only bet on trying to get superstars as our franchise quarterback, and he's also got to explain some things. With Deion Sanders being his dad, but also there's some tweets, there's some things that made him look like a bit of a selfish leader, and you got to explain that.
Yep.
And with Cam Ward, I just think it's very messy. And it's not messy in a way that he has insane high end. Like when you watched Anthony Richardson a couple years ago,
you could see him being, if it develops, all pro quarterback.
And the same went for Mahomes and Josh Allen. Like those guys, Mahomes obviously would have gone number one in a redraft, but they were saying about him, well, the footwork's not that great, but he could roll to his left and throw it sidearm 60 yards in the air for a touchdown. And the same with Josh Allen. It's like in a commercial, right? That one where he rolls out and throws the 60-yard touchdown or whatever at Wyoming. Those are not on Cam Ward.
Cam Ward does not have those on film, no.
So it just looks messy to me. It looks like it looks very much like college football. When we were doing our stuff last year, we were watching Drake May and Jaden Daniels. We were going, oh my gosh,
the trades are through the roof.
Right. I just don't see that.
Me neither. I don't see it with Cam Ward to that level. But and we certainly saw it last year with Hard Knocks that Giants GM Joe Schoen tried to trade up for him, couldn't do it. Teams get left out in the cold, whether that be in the draft or on the free agent market or on the quarterback trade market. If one of those reasonably to very desperate teams at the quarterback spot, Giants, Titans, Raiders, can't ultimately make a trade for Sam Darnold or Matthew Stafford, Joe Schoen might say, I just need to draft a quarterback because I've never drafted one and I'm a GM probably only one time. So that could be where, like we've seen in the past, where quarterbacks get artificially boosted in the draft where, like you're saying, maybe Cam Ward could be a Bo Nix type, but he probably would have been 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th quarterback off the board 1 year ago.
That's crazy. It is crazy how much it changes year to year. Even I think of 2020 and 2021, all the quarterbacks from 2020 were good. All of them from 2021 have failed so far.
Crazy is that? You're right.
All right, give me one more from you, and then I'll have one more.
Okay, I'm going a little bit of a deep cut because I'm deep on defensive tackles. JJ Pegues, defensive tackle from Ole Miss. You watch his film, and he is big. He's like 6'2", 6'3", 320. That classic, like pretty disruptive nose tackle. Kind of like, I'm saying classic size, but new age ability up the field. He's not just going to eat double teams and that's it. And then you're watching the film and you're like, wait, why is it showing Ole Miss's offense? And he is a legitimately good running back. Like they were giving him the ball in wildcat situations, in short yardage situations, just regular handoffs where you're like, oh, wait, dude, you're not supposed to be out there. And then he literally takes a handoff, makes a guy miss, stiff arms someone, gets 7 yards. Do I think he has a future as an NFL running back? No. But could teams use him in short yardage? Maybe. And does that hint at that he's going to be a freaky athlete? He's a little older. He transferred to Ole Miss, but I think the production as a up the field, bigger body nose tackle, the Vikings could be into that. I think a lot of teams could use size and upfield ability. And I just wonder if the coaches being so sure about his athleticism to give him literal handoffs. I think he had like 7 or 8 touchdowns last year. Does that hint at, oh, this guy is going to have a big combine workout and maybe get elevated maybe onto the second day of the draft?
Well, and they did that with Linval Joseph in college at East Carolina, where they would give him the ball.
There's like, he's a freak athlete, just here's the ball.
Exactly. Like, he's so freakish in terms of his raw athleticism, but also his ability to, it's like a lot of receivers are great basketball players. Like, there's an athleticism that goes beyond just, can you run fast, right?
Yeah, he's smooth.
But how that looks in the workouts might matter to him. And I look at him as, if the Vikings don't take a DT in the first round, what are they looking at in maybe the third round with their comp pick, or if they traded down? He's like third round,
he fits
right?
that mold. Yeah, I was going to say he feels like late day 2, early day 3 with a good workout, could be a little higher. But I really meant that I think he fits the mold just from a defensive tackle perspective, obviously, of what the Vikings need. They have the Harrison Phillip type that is technically sound, but a little smaller and not a great pass rusher. I think with Pegues, you get a little bit of pass rushing upside in a big body. Oh, well over 300 pounds.
I'll throw out one more.
Let's hear it.
Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the Vikings GM, because you have a quarterback decision to make. You have a 14-win team to rebuild. You have a
weird
bleep ton of, there's a lot of rebuilding to do because there's a lot of free agents, which they could bring them back. Are they coming back? Which we're going to get some of these answers and not some of these answers from him when we talk with him tomorrow. But I think he is one of the most interesting people to talk about, because there is now an expectation that's been set, rather than this, hey, you got your quarterback and you won 8 games and then you won 10 games and then you were a real contender. It was like, all right, Kirk's gone and 14 wins? What? And I also think that who they played last year played into that. The AFC South was 4 free wins for the Vikings, and there were a lot of bad teams. I've had this stat. This is a crazy stat, though. Each of the last 3 years before this, there were only 5 teams with 5 wins or fewer. Last year, there was 10. They doubled the number of truly awful teams in the league, which is probably why you had the Vikings win 15. You had the 2 other 14-win teams. I mean, just a couple years ago, Tennessee won the AFC with 12 wins.
12 wins, yeah.
Right. I mean, so you don't always see this. And so that puts that extra pressure, because now there's an expectation of, all right, no one thinks you're going to win 14 next year, but you got to be in that Super Bowl conversation going forward. So the timeline of this team is something I think about a ton. How that relates to JJ McCarthy. We know that it's going to be a main question for them about McCarthy's health and where he's at. And we know they're going to say positive things about him, but do we get an actual substantive
that word's hard to say always.
Update on JJ McCarthy? But I think his position in general and where he stands now in the toughest division in the NFL, with high expectations now and a lot to do on a roster, he is one of the main characters of Indianapolis.
Yeah, all these thoughts pop into my head when you're giving all these, when you're just rattling off great point after great point. Not necessarily here in Indy, but I think too, what makes sense for Kwesi to be one of the most fascinating people in the draft in draft season. The Vikings don't have a lot of picks, so like there's a little bit more ratcheted up pressure. Like, you don't have a lot of picks. How do you navigate it? Do you the 2019 draft where the Seahawks went in with 4 picks and they traded down like 6 times and got 10 picks? Do they do something like that? Probably not to that degree, but do they add more, or are they just like, we're going to have not a lot of picks and we're going to believe that we can hit on them? When you don't have a big draft class, it ratchets up the pressure. So I think his drafting history has been fairly good to this point. And it's easy when you have 11, 12 picks. Okay, we're going to hit on 2 or 3 of them. We'll be good. How does this draft class go for the Vikings without it maybe not being that big of a very small draft class?
See, what I would say about the drafting history is there isn't much, because
they traded up for Turner. They lost a couple picks there.
Right.
Yeah,
I think when you're looking at these last 2 drafts, you're probably thinking Addison, Blackman has potential, and then last year is so undecided that we should still look at those as really good high-end picks.
Mhm.
We don't have a ton of information on Dallas Turner yet. We'll see, still has high-end potential. And then McCarthy is the most important pick you can ever make as a GM. So even if the 2022 class has imploded entirely, 2023 has some players who are contributing, and then 2024 will dictate how we feel about it.
Yeah.
So it's a very short, and this is because Vikings fans will talk about, well, he can't draft. It's like, well, we haven't really seen him do a lot of drafting, but this one, I think that there's a weird world you have to live in. And I don't want to say everything because we're going to do like 3 podcasts here in Indy. So I don't want to say everything, but there's a weird world that Kwesi has to live in where he needs this draft to go right for him, just in terms of roster building and going into the future. But they have hardly any picks and drafts are random. And so it's like, you can say that it can be pretty random, but they really need more players who are making an impact on rookie contracts. I think they had the fewest number of snaps from their rookie class this year in the entire NFL, or just, I think on the whole roster, the fewest number on rookie contracts.
Gotcha.
That can only work for so long. So I think it is a super important draft for the Minnesota Vikings.
And if this draft hits, and again, we don't know how many picks they're going to make and what is a successful draft. Is it 2 out of 4 picks? Is it 1 out of 3? Is it 3 out of 5? You can also get Dallas Turner in year 2 as kind of a draft pick. And obviously JJ McCarthy is just coming in. So maybe that factors in a little where they wouldn't necessarily need to get like, oh man, they hit 3 home runs. Well, these guys are all rookie of the year candidates. They can get 3 or 4, 2 to 4 contributors. Oh, plus Dallas Turner, who's now in a prominent role. And oh yeah, JJ McCarthy's your starting quarterback.
And to me, it's always about the high-end picks rather than, there's a lot of players you can develop from middle rounds. You can find in free agency. You could get UDFAs, but high-end players, they usually require high draft picks unless you get super stupid lucky. So anyway, I don't want to say everything in the first podcast, so everyone has to listen to the rest of them. There's going to be reaction from myself, Dane Mizutani from the Pioneer Press, other guests that I am in the process of booking while we are here to talk about everything going on in Indianapolis, the rumors, the things that are said at the podiums, the reactions leading up to the events in the weekend, but most importantly, what the Vikings have to say tomorrow. So it'll be a big day for us on Tuesday. But thanks for your time here on Monday evening. I have a lot to talk about going forward, so make sure that you are subscribing and check out the newsletter, purpleinsider.football. If you haven't, that's where all my written analysis will be here in Indianapolis. So thanks so much, everybody, for watching/listening, and we will see you a lot here from Radio Row. It'll probably be a little louder in the background because there's nobody here right now. So football.